Hello. You know, I've been noticing in my last couple of videos, all the gray hair. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just getting so old. I'm starting to look like a hag. You know, the hair is just all and gray, and I just figured I might as well just give up on trying to look young and let nature just take its course. Oops. Okay. Anyway. Song of Mornius, chapter 20. It's not as long, it's only 11 pages. And introduces the character that I mentioned in at the start of chapter 19. The one that I completely forgot I had later added to the story to make it more, let's just say, it adds a whole new dimension to the story. It's very, very, very much a whole different dimension, as you are about to see. And so there it is. So here it is, chapter 20. Song of Mornius, chapter 20. The castle's gilt stone staircase was curved. The steps seemed to narrow to Galen's perception as he stumbled, panting, to the second level. Candles flickered in sconces along the hallway, flaring reminders of Mornius's fire. A short way down the hall, Galen spied what had to be the armory, two crossed swords mounted over its doorway. The door was missing, but its rusted hinges remained, stretched and bent along one side. At once Galen stumbled into the dusty room behind Roth, brushing aside sheets of overlapping cobwebs heavy with dead flies and bugs. Tarek stood in the center of a vaulted chamber, facing a broken, narrow window. His brows were clenched, pale as bone, his eyes intense as he glared at the sheathed sword in his hand. Fearfully, Galen stared at Tarek's trembling, how the prominent muscles of his forearms bulged as if he yearned to fling the ancient weapon away. Galen. Tarek raised his head, held Galen in place with the force of his stare. Very quietly he whispered, "Watch when I unsheath this sword. I want you to tell me what you see." Galen ventured forward to touch the sword's hilt, the moldering leather of its soggy scabbard. Glowering fiercely, Tarek yanked the blade free. Green and gold ringlets of icy vapor rose soft beneath the vaulted ceiling. They took on definition as they gathered, obscuring the red and brown tapestry draped behind. Galen blinked in horror as the glowing semblance of a bearded face formed, and then the armored body limed with green fire. "Again?" the apparition thundered. "Folly enough you disturbed my sleep once, but twice? Are you kidding me?" "That's him." Galen caught at Tarek's arm. "That's the Lost Warrior." "Lost Warrior my ass." The specter crossed his arms indignantly over the hawk-shaped crest on his breastplate. "I am cursed, defiled, drubbed, demeaned, belittled, ridiculed, exiled, defeated, doing my damnedest to rest with some dignity. Really pissed off that you woke me twice. Why, there are just so many better adjectives you could use right now. Boy, there are many excellent literary works in the library below. One surely will help you expand your vocabulary." Tarek stared at Galen. "I'm to rescue a ghost?" Galen winced at his tone. "Halram never told me this." He paused, casting about for Halram's thoughts, but Mornius was silent in his head. "What?" bellowed the ghost. "Is there a problem? I'm not just a ghost." He snarled the word with disgust. "I'm a Thalian knight. Lord Argus, to be exact. Of course you've heard of me." No," said Tarek. "Thalian knight." Galen blinked in dismay. "There haven't been any knights since—" "Halram's battle at Warder's Fall," Argus thundered. "That's right. How long has that been now? The giants had just been enslaved." He raised his phantom hands, counted quickly with transparent fingers. 600 years, he thundered. "By my shield, has it been that long?" Roth was speaking, Galen realized. Wrenching open his eyes, he watched the young lieutenant hurry to confront Tarek, hands braced on his hips. His left elbow, jutting outward, impaled the knight's lower abdomen. A very indignant Lord Argus glared down. "Tarek, answer me!" Roth was saying. "What is it? What are you talking about?" "Lord Argus." With a huff of disdain, Argus raised himself from Roth's arm. "I'm a who, not a what. What is it with you people and language problems?" Tarek nodded to Roth. "There's a ghost here. Do you see him, Galen? He says he's a Thalian knight. Tarek nodded to the weapon in his hand. "Appears whenever I draw this blade." "I see him," Galen nodded. "I also hear him. I might just go deaf." "Course you do," Argus said. He checked himself visibly and softened his voice. "That's how it is with these new, old magic curses. Because I've been cursed, all magical creatures will see me. And you, mister, guess I'll draw this sword twice and piss off the scary ghost even more. You see me too. But young Sir Elbows here cannot. Are all your warriors such children?" Recovering from his shock, Tarek fixed the dead knight with his stare. "You are being unnecessarily rude," he snapped. "And no, not all. The towns on Thalos have very few men left to spare. Malian has taken the rest." Galen studied the bright hawk emblazoned across the warrior's breastplate. The specter's face, not hidden by his beard, was as lean and fierce and hungry as the bird's, the partially transparent skin around his eyes furrowed with old pain. "Tarek, I know his voice," said Galen. "Holram spoke to him before in my head. I heard them talking." Argus's mouth twitched above his beard. "Oh, you poor boy! Has this malady of hearing voices gone on for long?" Still smiling, Argus leaned forward to tap Tarek's chest with a transparent finger. "Now look here. You have called me from a perfectly tolerable death, and for what? A rendezvous with Lord Elbows here? Or to watch this one describe hearing voices in his head?" "Yes, I know," Argus nodded to Galen. "Holram asks you to free me, but mind you, this has been my home since before your great-grandparents' parents were born. I'm quite comfortable here despite my curse. Holram can just find some other ghost to battle with the Vealer. I'm not in the mood." At that, Galen started. "He wants you to battle the priests?" "Priest Schmeatz," Argus sneered. "No. He wants me to fight the Vealer, as in the one and only, the one who enslaved the giants. You have a giant, do you not?" His phantom gaze returned to Tarek's face. "I presume from that you know of him." "Yes." Tarek nodded slowly. "He turned their magic against them." "Tell me about it." Argus coughed into his hand, then checked himself. He laughed softly as he caught Galen's expression. "Yes, sometimes I still forget I'm dead." With a shrug, he floated through hazy ribbons of green to the window. There he hovered, staring out through the encrusted glass. "I spent most of my prime fighting for Holram against Malian's minions. The Vealer was the worst, of course. He slew me, as he slew everything he touched with that blazing stone of his. Thanks to him, my bones lie scattered on those cliffs. Yes," he added at their expressions, "right under all those rocks you climbed." "So you're afraid," said Galen. He stiffened as the ghost's hard glare slapped his face. "You're afraid of this Vealer." Argus nodded. "You can bet your last pair of boots I'm afraid, and so should you if you had half a brain. His magecraft turns water to acid. By warping water, he can mold living flesh. He destroys minds, too. Did you see the things that attacked Teardon? They were of his making. Something enables him to live on after death, to do his work." "Malian." Tarek gritted the word. His gaze shifted past the ghost to the cracks in the window with their glimpses of the twilight sky. "Yes, indeed." Argus returned Galen's stare. "In exchange, Vealer gives Malian use of his old magic. Vealer's blazing stone is like your sky stone there." Argus nodded at the staff. "It allows Malian to touch the world." Galen licked his dry lips. His mouth felt thready like cotton. He glanced at his staff in his hand. It was Holram's tool, not his own. Like Mornius, he whispered. He glanced at Tarek. We must destroy this Velar and the Blazing Stone both, so Malian will be helpless. Helpless? The specter sneered. Malian is a warder. He'll never be helpless. But you may reduce him somewhat if you can keep him in his mountain. If you force him out, drive him from the protection of its heart, all his might will come in contact with the circle and Talankai will die. As for the Velar, Argus continued with a smirk, only the dead can fight the dead, and, as you can see, Argus spread his arms. But you're afraid. Galen spoke the words without derision. He understood fear more than he wished to. He took your life. The jovial grin faded from Argus's face. After a pause he turned where he hovered, floating back from the window. A dusty rack of swords gleamed dully through his torso, as if even now his foe the Velar sought ways to impale him. Yes, indeed, the ghost said. With Malian lending him power, he's stronger now than he ever was, while I... With a gesture of frustration, Argus flitted out of sight into a wall, then back out with a gray puff of dust. I'm a disturbance or a trick of the light. He nodded as Roth muffled a sneeze. That, he said severely, making someone sneeze, that is now the most lethal weapon in my arsenal. Galen slanted a glance at Tarek. Still, if Holram wants you, there must be a reason. He can't hope to win this by himself. Tarek sighed, his gaze on the window, on its darkening glimpses of the sky through its cobwebs and cracks. It's late, he said abruptly. We're done here. He nodded briefly to Argus, then sheathed the ancient sword. What are you playing at, Tarek? Roth blurted. All the while his frustration had been growing, inciting ever-increasing flashes from Mornius's gem. Ghosts? Seriously? Tarek moved around him to examine the empty air Argus had occupied. It's gone now, Lieutenant, he said. And yes, seriously. We had a spirit at Droxgard Keep who enjoyed a game of gambit now and again with my father. I didn't believe it. I thought it was a trick my father did to amuse his sons, until I saw it for myself one night, the ghosts, standing guard at the gate. He too was a Thalian knight. In fact, Tarek pivoted to face Roth. He's the one who led me to find you the day your colt threw you on the trail. If not for that, you'd be dead right now. Galen followed the two men, his skin crawling as he pushed the heavy cobwebs aside to clear the room. Roth was curious about his rescue, and Tarek eager to repeat the story for the younger man. It wasn't the first time. He glanced at Mornius, pulsing softly in his hand. As they started down the staircase, the candles expired one by one in the hallway behind them. Snuffed out by the wind, Galen mused, or so it seemed. Only he knew better. Tarek carried Argus's sword, his big hand gripping it through its moldering scabbard. What will you do? Galen asked the question to his broad back. Without pausing in his descent, Tarek answered, Ask Holram that question, Galen, not me. I must know how I'm to use this Lord Argus. Roth, moving beside Tarek, brushed at the ancient scabbard with his hand. I vote we throw this away at least, he said. Whew, what a stink! If you ask me... Later, Roth. A note of urgency entered Tarek's hard voice. We've delayed too long already. Leader Tarek! They hurried down, Galen clenching his staff with his right hand, the banister with his left. The giant stood in the shadows at the bottom, her face turned toward the library's open doorway and the fading twilight beyond. Old magic, she whispered. With angry hands she whipped out her sword. Warped magic! It is strong! It is... Avalar broke off with a snarl. Her eyes were wild, seething with rage. She spat out words with every breath. I felt this before, in Teardon. It killed my trainers. It killed children. The priest who fought you? Tarek rushed past her to the doorway. Galen glanced down once more at the mosaic as he passed, at the vision from his dreams of the one son's death and the other's rebirth. A hand clasped his shoulder. Avalar was turning him, guiding him up 3 gilded steps toward an adjacent room. She crouched behind him through its doorway, twisting her wide shoulders to get through, but always her hand remained heavy upon his back. He glimpsed the remains of an elegant dining table as she hurried him across the room. "It hunts you," she whispered fiercely above him. "Hurry!" Galen swallowed. Avalar's heavy sword was poised beside his head. She urged him through another doorway and into an arched forehall. The gilt stone ceiling was as high as 2 floors, allowing her to straighten fully. She did so with a groan of relief, then strode at once around the rows of white pillars to the main entrance. Raising her sword above and behind her head, she cracked open the iron-clad door. Galen heard footsteps. He sensed Tarek and Roth draw close behind him, caught the annoyance in the tone of Tarek's breath. "We checked outside, Avalar," he said. "We see nothing of magic or the enemy." Clenching his staff like a weapon, Galen stepped back to see Tarek's face. In his hand, Mornius' skystone flashed wildly, drawing Tarek's gaze. "It senses magic," Galen told him softly, "but it also reacts when Avalar gets upset, or anyone really," he added, "but especially when it's Avalar." Eyes narrowed, Tarek nodded, the muscles tightening his jaw under his beard. Understood. He confronted the giant. "Avalar, come, we must head back." Slowly Avalar turned from the silver-gray iron of the door. A feral grin replaced her scowl as her gaze found Tarek's. Her wide blue eyes glimmered as she crouched down. "I am ready," she said. With those words, she pushed with her arm to open the massive door. Tarek nodded and stepped warily into the night. Her upright blade above his head, Avalar followed close on his heels. With Roth preceding him, Galen hurried to the doorway. The young lieutenant also drew his sword. For a moment he paused to swing the weapon, loosening up the muscles of his arm. "To me!" Roth snapped with a gesture. Then he moved out the door. Galen obeyed the lieutenant at once, keeping as close to Roth as he could. He stepped out into the night, into air heavy with dread and something else. Mornius flared and flashed. A piercing blue fire blazed bright around the staff. Tarek, scanning the night, stood to the left of the doorway as Galen ventured out. Beyond him, Avalar prowled the broken wall, her back bent, the tip of her blade stabbing at crannies between the stones. "Something," she snarled. "It is close." Tarek turned where he stood to stare upward along the wall. "Use your senses," he called. "Avalar! Galen! Let them guide you!" Galen stepped past Tarek, his breath pluming before his face and obscuring his vision. It seemed the air shifted against his skin, like clay might beneath a sculptor's hand. Then it rose all at once before him, a heavy weight, slapping him down until he stumbled on the uneven rocks. Another weight knocked him off his feet, this time physical, and with it the breathy slap of angry wings. He screamed as something like knives dug into his back, diving painfully through muscle and hooking under his bones. The wings slapped furiously, hard flesh striking the air. He felt his legs dragging along the rocks, then his feet, then... Below him, Avalar was leaping to catch him, Tarek and Roth lunging upward with their swords. Galen screamed again as the grip on his bones shook him fiercely. Below him, the giant's hand missed and clawed empty air. "Galen!" Inhuman screams above his head swallowed Tarek's cry, yet Galen heard him. For a moment their eyes met. In agony he watched the giant charging into the forest below him, slashing wildly at the snow-heavy brush, plunging headlong between the trees after him in pursuit. But the wings carrying him skyward were wrought by a warder, strong and swift. Already she had vanished from his vision, swallowed by the trees and the cover of night. He fought to keep Mornius close. The claws on his back repositioned themselves, turning him so he looked skyward. A serpent's tail tightened around his neck. It lifted him to a set of bared teeth, jutting from human jaws. Galen screamed again as the fangs pierced his throat. With a frenzied snarl, the Veelerman fastened its mouth on the spraying of his blood. A darkness descended then, filled with ice and endless fog. As he spun toward oblivion, his only thought left was of gripping his staff.